All right, let's dive into something that's probably been on your mind too. Fairness, justice, all that. But instead of just thinking about the ideas, we're going to look at what people actually do. How do they act when it comes to sharing, being equitable, the real deal?
Yeah, think of this as like getting some hard data for those big philosophical ideas of distributive justice.
Yeah.
We're not just in our heads here. We're going deep into how people actually behave.
Mm.
Messy, real-world stuff, but measured, scientifically.
Exactly. We've been digging into a whole bunch of empirical research in moral psychology. And the main tools we're using for this investigation, economic games.
Oh, yes, the games.
Especially ones like the ultimatum game and the dictator game. And I know some of you listening might be like, wait, games? How can those simple things tell us about something as complex as human motivation?
Well, you see, these economic games are kind of like mini models of how people interact. Researchers have been using them for a while to study social interactions. They're controlled, we can change things up systematically, and most importantly, we can repeat them. So they give us a really solid bridge between, the theories of justice and what people actually do.
Right. And especially for personality research, they can help us define those abstract ideas we usually just get from questionnaires in a more concrete, behavioral way.
Definitely.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out what these studies tell us about why we care about justice. Like, is it all just about self-interest, or is there something more going on? How well do our philosophical ideas about justice match up with reality? And what can we actually do to encourage people to be more just?
Those are the big questions, all right.
So to kick things off, let's start with the ultimatum game.
The ultimatum game. A classic.
Okay, so imagine there are two players. One's the offerer and the other's the responder. The offerer gets some money, say $10, and they decide how to split it with the responder. The responder can either take the deal and they both get the money as agreed, or they can say no way and nobody gets anything. Pretty straightforward, right?
Easy peasy. Now, if we were to just think about it logically, the offerer should offer the absolute minimum, like a penny, and the responder, wanting something rather than nothing, should just take it.
Right. That's the perfectly self-interested, rational move.
Exactly. That's what game theory calls the subgame perfect Nash equilibrium. But here's where things get juicy.
Right. When researchers actually ran these experiments, starting with Guth and then folks like Forsyth and Kahneman, they found that people weren't acting like those perfectly rational, selfish robots that game theory predicted.
Nope, not at all. Like in Forsyth's study, not a single offer kept all the money. Instead, most offers were closer to a 50-50 split. 3/4 of the offerers actually offered at least half. And Kahneman, similar results. Average offer was almost $5, and a whopping 81% went for the equal split.
Wow. So people are way more generous than we might expect.
And the responders. They weren't just taking whatever scraps were thrown their way either. Kahneman found that they demanded more, on average about $2.50. More than half wanted more than just $1.50. So clearly something's going on here beyond just cold, hard calculation.
Yeah, it seems like people are actually concerned about fairness, even if it means getting less money.
Right. The initial thought was that people wanted to be fair and that a 50-50 split just felt right. And when responders rejected those lowball offers, it was because they felt like they were being treated unfairly, or maybe they wanted to punish the offerer for being stingy.
Makes sense. But as we know, research rarely gives us a simple answer. Later studies started to find things that made this whole fairness explanation a bit more complicated.
Oh, yeah. Things got a lot more interesting. Like in the 90s, Straub and Murnaghan decided to mess around with how much information each player had.
This is where it gets really fascinating for someone interested in the philosophy of it all. They found that when the offerer knew the responder didn't know the total amount of money, the offers got a lot lower.
Exactly. They got sneaky, right? Like if there was $10 to split, but the responder didn't know that, the average offer dropped to a bit over $3 compared to, over $4 when everyone knew the total.
So if people were just trying to be fair and divide things equally, it shouldn't matter if the responder knew how much there was in total.
Right. But the fact that it did matter suggests something else is going on. Maybe the offerers were trying to figure out how little they could get away with. Kind of strategic, maybe even a little self-serving.
Definitely a more strategic element there. And then Palutla and Murnaghan did this cool thing where they played around with the language used and whether someone was watching.
Yes, the power of words and prying eyes.
So they found that even when responders knew the total amount, offerers still tried to lowball them if they called their offer fair. It's like they were trying to trick them into taking less.
Yeah, like using the word fair as a weapon. And the mean offer dropped even further to about 260 with that fair label.
Crazy. It's like they weren't just trying to be fair, but to appear fair, especially when it meant more money for them. And then there was the whole thing with a third party evaluating the offers.
Oh, that's a good one. When people knew someone was going to judge their offer, the average jumped up to almost $5, and a lot more offerers went for the 50-50 split.
So it really matters what other people think. We want to look good, even if it costs us. And on the flip side, researchers also started looking at why responders rejected those low offers. Was it just about fairness?
Not so simple, it turns out. Bowles and his team looked at what would happen if responders had other options.
The outside options, like a backup plan.
Exactly. And guess what? When offerers knew about these backup plans, they offered even less.
So it's like they were taking advantage of the responders' situation. Not very fair, is it?
Not really. And Bowles found even more shenanigans. Offers sometimes lied about how much money there was. And when responders figured it out, they got mad and rejected offers, even if those offers were objectively good for them.
So it's not just about the money, it's about being treated with respect.
Absolutely. So all this research started to show that maybe it wasn't just about fairness. Maybe it was more about self-interest disguised as fairness.
Like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Maybe something like that. So now, instead of those simple explanations, we're looking at something more complex. Offers might be afraid of rejection, so they try to seem fair to avoid that, while also maximizing their own gains. Responders might reject offers not just because they're unfair, but because it hurts their pride. Maybe the fairness thing is just an excuse.
Like a way to justify their feelings.
Right, but this is still a puzzle. There's no one answer.
Definitely an ongoing debate. Now, let's make things even simpler. Let's get rid of that whole rejection thing and talk about the dictator game.
Ah, the dictator game. Pure power.
So in this game, you have a dictator who gets $10. They can decide how much, if any, to give to a recipient. But here's the catch. The recipient has no say. They just take what they get. No back and forth, no deals, just the dictator's decision.
Total control. Now, from a purely selfish standpoint, the dictator should just keep all the money. No reason to give anything away.
Right. That's the cold, hard logic of self-interest.
Yeah.
But once again, the research threw us a curveball.
It did. Forsyth found that almost 80% of dictators actually gave something to the recipient, and about 20% went for the even split.
And Kahneman found that over 3/4 of people preferred to split the money evenly rather than keep most of it for themselves.
Yeah, $10 for me, $10 for you, much better than 18 for me and a measly 2 for you, apparently. That doesn't seem very self-interested, does it?
Not at all. And what's interesting is that unlike in the ultimatum game, where how much information people had mattered, in the dictator game, it didn't seem to make much of a difference.
That's a good point. Some researchers, like Van Dyke and Vermont, thought this meant that maybe the dictator game revealed a more genuine concern for fairness. Like maybe the ultimatum game was more about strategy because of that possibility of getting your offer rejected.
That's an interesting distinction. But let's be real, that whole idea of a 50-50 split being fair is something philosophers could argue about forever. And what's considered fair might be totally different depending on where you are in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's still useful to see how much people deviate from just being purely selfish.
Definitely. But just like with the ultimatum game, those initial findings of generosity in the dictator game prompted more research to see if maybe there were other explanations.
Oh yeah, more digging. And List's study with the take option was a real eye-opener.
That one really gets into the nitty-gritty of motivation. So in the basic setup, dictators got $5 and could share some of it.
Right. And many of them did. But then List added this twist where they could actually take money away from the other person. Right. And when that happened, giving went way down. People started taking even. And then, get this, when the dictators thought they'd earned the $10, they almost never gave anything away. In fact, they were more likely to take from the other person.
So it's not just about being a nice person, it's about how you got the money in the first place.
Exactly. Entitlement, ownership, all that plays a role. And Dana and his colleagues did another clever thing with the dictator game. They added an exit option.
Ah, yes, the escape route.
You got it. And a bunch of dictators took it. They could walk away with more money, and the recipient wouldn't even know they were part of a game. No guilt, no looking bad.
But the most telling part was when the recipients were totally clueless about the whole game from the start.
Oh, yeah. That one was a bombshell. The dictators knew they could keep everything, and no one would be the wiser. And guess what? Most of them did exactly that.
So it seems like at least part of the reason people give in the dictator game is because they don't want to look bad.
Right. It's about social image, maybe feeling guilty if they don't give, not
Yeah.
necessarily pure altruism.
So once again, the simple explanations don't cut it.
Nope. It's a mix of things. Maybe wanting to feel good about giving, not wanting to seem selfish, trying to meet expectations.
It's a complex web of motivations. But we also have to remember that these are just games in a lab. They don't always reflect how people act in the real world.
Good point. Like, there was a study by Winking and Miser where they left casino chips at a bus stop, and almost everyone kept them.
Wow, so the context really matters.
Big time. And we got to be careful at the whole experimenter demand thing, too. Maybe people act differently because they know they're being watched by scientists.
Right, that's always a possibility. Now let's shift gears and talk about a really cool variation on the dictator game developed by Daniel Batson. He called it moral hypocrisy.
Bathen's work is fascinating. He had this setup where participants had to decide how to split two tasks. One was awesome, you got a chance to win $30, and the other was just boring. They could either give the good task to themselves or to another participant. Simple enough. But here's the kicker. The other person thought the task assignment was totally random.
Ah, I see where this is going. Did people mostly give themselves the good task?
Yep, most did. 16 out of 20. But guess what? Only one of them thought that was the morally right thing to do. And on average, those who gave themselves the good task rated their action as way less moral than those who gave it to the other person.
Wow, so they knew what was fair, but they still acted selfishly.
Exactly. But Batson didn't stop there. He wanted to see what would happen if he made the idea of fairness more obvious.
How'd he do that?
Well, in one variation, he suggested they flip a coin to decide who got the good task. And he even gave them a coin to use.
Smart.
Right. And most people agreed that flipping a coin would be the fairest way to do it. But even then, most people still ended up with a good task.
So even when they knew what was fair, they still found a way to justify giving themselves the better deal.
Exactly. It was like going through the motions was enough to make them feel better about their choice.
That's fascinating. Did those who flipped the coin rate their actions as more moral than those who didn't?
You bet. And that's where the moral hypocrisy thing comes in. It's not just about being weak and giving in to temptation. It's about wanting to seem moral while still benefiting from being unfair.
Sneaky.
And it's not just that. Batson also looked at what happened when participants could choose to have the experimenter assign the tasks. They knew in advance what the assignment would be.
So they could avoid making the decision themselves.
Exactly. And most people took the good task when the experimenter gave it to them. But a decent number also took the boring task when it was offered. And almost everyone who accepted either task said it was morally okay.
So it's easier to go along with something unfair if someone else is making the decision? Less guilt, maybe?
Exactly. You can keep that positive self-image without actually making the tough choice. And Batson even tried a trick with a clearly marked coin.
So there was no way to cheat.
Right. But even then, most people who flipped it still gave themselves the good task, and they still thought their actions were morally acceptable.
It's like the illusion of fairness was enough.
And then he did this other study where he secretly watched people flip the coin. He found these fiddlers who flipped the coin in a way that should have given the other person the good task, but then they took it for themselves anyway.
So they cheated.
Basically.
Yeah.
And those fiddlers rated their actions as more moral than those who didn't flip the coin at all, but less moral than those who actually won the flip legitimately.
So even a little bit of pretending to be fair can make people feel better about themselves. But Batson also found some things that could make people act more fairly.
He did, like putting a mirror in the room while people made their decision.
A mirror, really?
Yep, and it worked. People were way less likely to give themselves the good task when they could see themselves in the mirror.
Maybe it made them more self-aware.
That's what Batson thought. It's harder to ignore the fact that you're being selfish when you're literally staring at yourself.
Makes sense. What else worked?
Perspective taking. When people were told to imagine themselves in the other person's shoes, they were way more likely to give the other person the good task.
So empathy can make a difference.
Big time. Batson also found that most people actually wanted the experimenter to flip the coin for them.
So maybe there is a desire to be fair, even if it's not always strong enough to overcome our self-interest.
Maybe. But then he did this one study with a positive task and a negative one, giving the other person electric shocks.
Oh, that's harsh.
Yeah. And people were much less willing to let the experimenter decide in that case. More people just took the good task for themselves, even though they knew it wasn't the right thing to do.
So fairness goes out the window when we're really afraid of something bad happening to us.
Seems that way. So what Batson's research shows is that our fairness motivations are a bit of a mixed bag. They're there, but often overshadowed by self-interest and easily influenced by the situation.
Definitely complicated. Now, we've been talking a lot about how the situation affects fairness. But what about individual differences, like personality traits?
That's the next piece of the puzzle. Why are some people consistently more fair than others? Could be personality.
And researchers have started to look at this using models like the Big Five.
The big five. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism.
Right, those five. But there isn't really a specific trait for justice in that model.
Nope. But they have found some links, like people who score high on agreeableness, the cooperative, empathetic types, tend to be more generous in those economic games.
And less likely to reject offers. Makes sense.
Right. And then there's conscientiousness, the organized, rule-following type. Sometimes they offer less in dictator games.
Maybe because they're following the rules of the game, which say they can keep it all.
Could be. But those correlations aren't super strong. So researchers have been looking at other personality models, like the Echik-Zeko model. It has this thing called honesty-humility.
Honesty-humility. That sounds relevant.
Oh, yeah. It's about being sincere, fair, not greedy, and modest. And people high in honesty-humility give more in dictator games.
Right.
Even more so than just agreeableness.
So it's not just about being nice. It's about having a genuine sense of fairness.
Right. And Hilbig and Zettler did this really cool study where they found that people high in honesty-humility were fair in both the dictator and ultimatum games. But those who were low in honesty-humility were only fair when it benefited them in the ultimatum game.
So when there was no risk of getting rejected, they went full selfish mode.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then there's this other cool concept, justice sensitivity.
Justice sensitivity, what's that all about?
It's about how sensitive you are to justice and injustice. And it has 4 parts, like how much does it bother you to be a victim of injustice?
So being treated unfairly yourself.
Yep. And what about seeing someone else being treated unfairly? Or benefiting from injustice? Or even doing something unjust yourself?
It's like different ways of experiencing unfairness.
Exactly. And researchers have found that these different sensitivities can predict how people feel about things like social inequality.
Interesting. So how does justice sensitivity play out in those economic games?
Well, Fechenhauer and Huang did a study and found that people who really hate being treated unfairly, the victim sensitivity folks, were actually less likely to split the money evenly in the dictator game.
That's counterintuitive.
It is. But those who are more sensitive to seeing others being treated unfairly or to doing something unjust themselves, they were more likely to split it evenly.
So it's not just about yourself, it's about how you view fairness in general.
Precisely. So the takeaway here is that our motivations for fairness are really complex. It's not just about the situation or your personality, it's a mix of everything.
Definitely a lot to unpack. So for all you deep thinkers out there, what can we learn from all this research?
Well, it's pretty clear that our motivations for fairness are kind of messy. It's not just about cold logic or pure altruism. Information, whether we're being watched, how we justify our actions, and even our personality all play a role.
And for those of you interested in the philosophical side of things, this stuff can really make you rethink those big ideas about justice.
Definitely. Like, how realistic are our ethical theories if we're so easily swayed by self-interest? And how much does our idea of fairness match up with how we actually act?
Those are some big questions, and they lead us to another big question. How do we encourage people to be more just?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. Is it about having clear rules and consequences? Or is it about making people more self-aware and empathetic?
Maybe a bit of both. Something to ponder.
Absolutely.
Huh?
And as we move forward, we need to find ways to connect these insights from the lab with the complexities of the real world. There's a lot more to explore.
A lot more to dive into.